Chapter 15 of A Negro Explorer at the North Pole by Matthew A. Henson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Captain Bartlett and his two boys had commenced their return journey, and the main column, depleted to its final strength, started northward. We were six: Peary, the commander, the Eskimos, Ootah, Egingwah, Seegloo, and Ooqueah, and myself. Day and night were the same. My thoughts were on the going and getting forward and on nothing else. The wind was from the southeast and seemed to push us on, and the sun was at our backs, a ball of livid fire, rolling his way above the horizon in never-ending day. The captain had gone. Commander Peary and I were alone, save for the four Eskimos, the same as we had been so often in the past years, and as we looked at each other we realized our position and we knew without speaking that the time had come for us to demonstrate that we were the men who, it had been ordained, should unlock the door which held the mystery of the Arctic. Without an instant's hesitation, the order to push on was given, and we started off in the trail made by the captain to cover the farthest north he had made, and to push on over 130 miles to our final destination. The captain had had rough going, but, owing to the fact that his trail was our track for a short time, and that we came to good going shortly after leaving his turning point, we made excellent distance without any trouble, and only stopped when we came to a lead barely frozen over, a full 25 miles beyond. We camped and waited for the strong southeast wind to force the sides of the lead together. The Eskimos had eaten a meal of stewed dog, cooked over a fire of wood from a discarded sledge, and, owing to their wonderful powers of recuperation, were in good condition. Commander Peary and myself, rested and invigorated by our 30 hours in the last camp, waiting for the return and departure of Captain Bartlett, were also in fine fettle, and accordingly the accomplishment of 25 miles of northward progress was not exceptional. With my proven ability in gauging distances, Commander Peary was ready to take the reckoning as I made it, and he did not resort to solar observations until we were within a hand's grasp of the pole. The memory of those last 5 marches, from the farthest north of Captain Bartlett to the arrival of our party at the pole, is a memory of toil, fatigue, and exhaustion. But we were urged on and encouraged by our relentless commander, who was himself being scourged by the final lashings of the dominating influence that had controlled his life. From the land to 87 degrees 48 minutes north, Commander Peary had had the best of the going, for he had brought up the rear and had utilized the trail made by the preceding parties, and thus he had kept himself in the best of condition for the time when he made the spurt that brought him to the end of the race. From 87 degrees 48 minutes north, he kept in the lead, and did his work in such a way as to convince me that he was still as good a man as he had ever been. We marched and marched, falling down in our tracks repeatedly, until it was impossible to go on. We were forced to camp, in spite of the impatience of the commander, who found himself unable to rest, and who only waited long enough for us to relax into sound sleep, when he would wake us up and start us off again. I do not believe that he slept for 1 hour, from April 2 until after he had loaded us up and ordered us to go back over our old trail, and I often think that from the instant when the order to return was given until the land was again sighted, he was in a continual daze. Onward we forced our weary way. Commander Peary took his sights from the time our chronometer watches gave, and I, knowing that we had kept on going in practically a straight line, was sure that we had more than covered the necessary distance to ensure our arrival at the top of the earth. It was during the march of the 3rd of April that I endured an instant of hideous horror. We were crossing a lane of moving ice. Commander Peary was in the lead setting the pace, and a half hour later the 4 boys and myself followed in single file. They had all gone before, and I was standing and pushing at the upstanders of my sledge, when the block of ice I was using as a support slipped from underneath my feet, and before I knew it the sledge was out of my grasp, and I was floundering in the water of the lead. I did the best I could. I tore my hood from off my head and struggled frantically. My hands were gloved and I could not take hold of the ice, but before I could give the grand hailing sigh of distress, faithful old Ootah had grabbed me by the nape of the neck, the same as he would have grabbed a dog, and with one hand he pulled me out of the water, and with the other hurried the team across. He had saved my life, but I did not tell him so, for such occurrences are taken as part of the day's work, and the sledge he safeguarded was of much more importance, for it held as part of its load the commander's sextant, the mercury, and the coils of piano wire that were the essential portion of the scientific part of the expedition. My kamiks, boots of sealskin, were stripped off, and the congealed water was beaten out of my bearskin trousers, and with a dry pair of kamiks we hurried on to overtake the column. When we caught up, we found the boys gathered around the commander, doing their best to relieve him of his discomfort, for he had fallen into the water also, and while he was not complaining, I was sure that his bath had not been any more voluntary than mine had been. When we halted on April 6, 1909, and started to build the igloos, the dogs and sledges having been secured, I noticed Commander Peary at work unloading his sledge and unpacking several bundles of equipment. He pulled out from under his kooletah, thick fur outer garment, a small folded package and unfolded it. I recognized his old silk flag, and realized that this was to be a camp of importance. Our different camps had been known as Camp No. 1, No. 2, etc., but after the turning back of Captain Bartlett, the camps had been given names, such as Camp Nansen, Camp Cagney, etc., and I asked what the name of this camp was to be. Camp Peary? This, my boy, is to be Camp Morris K. Jessup, the last and most northerly camp on the earth. He fastened the flag to a staff and planted it firmly on the top of his igloo. For a few minutes it hung limp and lifeless in the dead calm of the haze, and then a slight breeze, increasing in strength, caused the folds to straighten out, and soon it was rippling out in sparkling color. The stars and stripes were nailed to the pole. A thrill of patriotism ran through me, and I raised my voice to cheer the starry emblem of my native land. The Eskimos gathered around, and, taking the time from Commander Peary, 3 hearty cheers rang out on the still, frosty air, our dumb dogs looking on in puzzled surprise. As prospects for getting a sight of the sun were not good, we turned in and slept, leaving the flag proudly floating above us. This was a thin silk flag that Commander Peary had carried on all of his Arctic journeys, and he had always flown it at his last camps. It was as glorious and as inspiring a banner as any battle-scarred, blood-stained standard of the world, and this badge of honor and courage was also blood-stained and battle-scarred, for at several places there were blank squares marking the spots where pieces had been cut out at each of the farthests of its brave bearer, and left with the records in the cairns as mute but eloquent witnesses of his achievements. At the North Pole, a diagonal strip running from the upper left to the lower right corner was cut, and this precious strip, together with a brief record, was placed in an empty tin, sealed up and buried in the ice, as a record for all time. Commander Peary also had another American flag, sewn on a white ground, and it was the emblem of the Daughters of the Revolution Peace Society. He also had and flew the emblem of the Navy League, and the emblems of a couple of college fraternities of which he was a member. It was about 10 or 10:30 a.m. on the 7th of April, 1909, that the commander gave the order to build a snow shield to protect him from the flying drift of the surface snow. I knew that he was about to take an observation, and while we worked I was nervously apprehensive, for I felt that the end of our journey had come. When we handed him the pan of mercury, the hour was within a very few minutes of noon. Laying flat on his stomach, he took the elevation and made the notes on a piece of tissue paper at his head. With sun-blinded eyes, he snapped shut the vernier, a graduated scale that subdivides the smallest divisions on the sector of the circular scale of the sextant. And with the resolute squaring of his jaws, I was sure that he was satisfied, and I was confident that the journey had ended. Feeling that the time had come, I ungloved my right hand and went forward to congratulate him on the success of our 18 years of effort, but a gust of wind blew something into his eye, or else the burning pain caused by his prolonged look at the reflection of the limb of the sun forced him to turn aside, and with both hands covering his eyes, he gave us orders to not let him sleep for more than 4 hours, for 6 hours later he purposed to take another sight about 4 miles beyond, and that he wanted at least 2 hours to make the trip and get everything in readiness. I unloaded a sledge and reloaded it with a couple of skins, the instruments, and a cooker with enough alcohol and food for one meal for 3, and then I turned in to the igloo where my boys were already sound asleep. The thermometer registered 29 degrees below zero. I fell into a dreamless sleep and slept for about a minute, so I thought, when I was awakened by the clatter and noise made by the return of Peary and his boys. The commander gave the word, "We will plant the Stars and Stripes at the North Pole," and it was done. On the peak of a huge paleocrystic floeberg, the glorious banner was unfurled to the breeze, and as it snapped and crackled with the wind, I felt a savage joy and exultation. Another world's accomplishment was done and finished, and as in the past, from the beginning of history, wherever the world's work was done by a white man, he had been accompanied by a colored man. From the building of the pyramids and the journey to the cross, to the discovery of the New World and the discovery of the North Pole, the Negro had been the faithful and constant companion of the Caucasian, and I felt all that it was possible for me to feel, that it was I, a lowly member of my race, who had been chosen by fate to represent it at this almost the last of the world's great work. The 4 Esquimos who stood with Commander Peary at the North Pole were the brothers, Ootah and Egingwah, the old campaigner, Seegloo, and the sturdy, boyish Ooqueah. 4 devoted companions, blindly confident in the leader, they worked only that he might succeed, and for the promise of reward that had been made before they had left the ship, which promise they were sure would be kept. Together with the faithful dogs, these men had ensured the success of the master. They had all of the characteristics of the dogs, including the dog's fidelity. Within their breasts lingered the same infatuations that Commander Peary seemed to inspire in all who were with him, and though frequently complaining and constantly requiring to be urged to do their utmost, they worked faithfully and willingly. Ootah, of my party, was the oldest, a married man, of about 34 years, and regarded as the best all-around member of the tribe, a great hunter, a kind father, and a good provider. Owing to his strong character and the fact that he was more easily managed by me than by any of the others, he had been a member of my party from the time we left the ship. Without exaggeration, I can say that we had both saved each other's lives more than once, but it had all gone in as part of the day's work, and neither of us dwelt on our obligations to the other. My other boy, Ooqueah, was a young man of about 19 or 20, very sturdy and stocky of build, and with an open, honest countenance, a smile that was childlike and bland, and a character that was childlike and bland. It was alleged that the efforts of young Ooqueah were spurred on by the shafts of love, and that it was in the hopes of winning the hand of the demure Miss Andore, the charming daughter of Iqua, the first Esquimo of Commander Peary's acquaintance, that he worked so valiantly. His efforts were of an ardent character, but it was not due to the ardor of love, as far as I could see, but to his desire to please and his anxiety to win the promised rewards that would raise him to the grade of a millionaire, according to Esquimo standards. Commander Peary's boy, Egingwah, was the brother of my boy Ootah, also married and of good report in his community, and it was he who drove the Morris K. Jessup sledge. If there was any sentiment among the Esquimos in regard to the success of the venture, Ootah and Seegloo, by their unswerving loyalty and fidelity, expressed it. They had been members of the Farthest North Party in 1906, the party that was almost lost beyond and in the Big Lead, and only reached the land again in a state of almost complete collapse. They were the ones who, on bidding Commander Peary farewell in 1906, when he was returning, a saddened and discouraged man, told him to be of good cheer and that when he came back again, Ootah and Seegloo would go along and stay until Commander Peary had succeeded, and they did. The cowardice of their fellow Esquimos at the Big Lead on this journey did not in the least demoralize them, and when they were absolutely alone on the trail, with every chance to turn back and return to comfort, wife, and family, they remained steadfast and true, and ever northward guided their sledges. Chapter 16